Everyone, this last video with preventing misguided reading is going to go over chapters 4 and 5. Chapter 4 is about really thinking about balanced instruction. The great reading debate, which you'll hear many times if you haven't already, um, is the idea that reading is an either or thing. Either early reading instruction should focus on print systems, so very phonics driven, visually driven, looking at what visual information from the text can give us, or that it should be focused on meaning. So, not even worrying about what the print looks like, and let's look at what makes sense within the story. Um, but what we really want is for those information systems to be dependent partners on one another. We've said many, many times now that a smoothly operating system, a student who is a strategic, independent reader, considers both aspects, considers both print and story elements to help them integrate those cues that they're seeing. So it's not an overemphasis on one or the other, but a balance of the two. And so if you think back, a few weeks ago to when we were looking at those different um, types of readers, print dependent readers or story dependent readers, or readers who have skill in one, or they don't have skill in either, those students are typically created from reading instruction that is an overemphasis on one or the other. So we really have to be um, very intentional with making sure that we're addressing both. Looking at strategy 15 is to engage all students, regardless of instructional reading level, and thinking deeply about the story. I think it might have been Connor in week 3 or 4 who asked this question of when is it too soon to begin to think about these, and my response was when my son was a toddler and he was being read to, I was showing him how important meaning was. As he grew into a kindergartner, I mean, yes, we were looking at, oh, can you find N, can you find A, but at the same time we were asking these big questions which we're about to look at, to have them really engage in deep thinking, just using the pictures. What do you see happening here? What do you think is going to happen next? Pictures are such a crucial vehicle for beginning readers in communicating a really complex story that might not be represented in complexity of text. So if you think about those early readers, like level A, level B, typically the text is 2, 3, 4, maybe word sentences, but typically the picture is a lot more complex than that. So bringing children's attention to a picture and really helping them think deeply about the story is important, even at an early age. So thinking about that comprehension instruction, even at very early ages, kind of harkens back to Allington's uh, speech that we listened to in week 2, I think it was. And he was saying, like, why do we drill kids with these surface level questions that we as adults would never waste our time asking one another if we were in a book club? So Perkins and Kraft call them little questions, like, what house did each little pig build? Or what did the wolf say before he blew down the houses? Or what happens at the beginning, middle, and end of the story? Like those are our questions that yes, children might be able to answer, but they don't dig into the deep comprehension that then we expect children to suddenly have um, once they get past a certain level. So asking those big questions like, how are the pigs' houses different? Why did the writer have the third pig build the brick house instead of the second little pig? Or why did the wolf say, sorry about that typo there, say the same thing at each house? And what do the pigs learn from their experience? Those are some really deep questions, some big questions that focus on and support comprehension instruction, even in what we would consider, quote, easy books. Strategy 16 for balancing this reading instruction is teaching students to look closely at print, but not at the expense of story. To read, we have to have print. We rely on it. We can't read without it. But students have to know how to access that visual information without making it the driver of everything. Remember, the goal is balance and integration. And I've said it before that one of the most difficult hurdles for a reading teacher is a student who is so print dependent, they're only worried about looking at that print, that they've completely forgotten that reading is supposed to make sense. And that's a really hard thing to reteach a child who has been through years and years of just, well, not just, but heavily dependent print instruction. Chapter 5 recommits to integrated processing, which is very similar to that balance alignment. Thinking about strategies, which we're going to look at a bit in another video. Thinking about strategies, a lot of texts, such as Debbie Miller's 2002 work, focus on these isolated strategies. But we're constantly realizing that reading is a system where things are interwoven, interconnected, and depend on one another. We can teach them isolated strategies, but we have to teach them how to integrate them. And if you look at your South Carolina standards for reading, you will see one of the first ones is within foundational practices that students are using an integrated system. So one way to help support that integrated processing is teaching students to notice the way a text supports itself. So a lot of times I've been guilty of this as well, a student figures out a word and I say, you got it. And so I'm the one that is confirming that, yes, you got that word correct after problem solving. But what if we instead asked after they figured it out, how do you know that word is dog? Or how else could you know? Right then, we are asking the student to be able to say, well, I know it's dog because the picture shows a dog and it starts with a D. So I know it can't be puppy or wolf. Right there, you're supporting the child in doing their own work and figuring out whether they're right or not, and using the text to do that. You want them to examine their own behavior because, again, if they don't do it with you in guided reading, they are not going to do it when you're gone in independent reading. They're just not. So you want to see those behaviors while you're there so that they can carry that forward into independent reading. Strategy 19 is about prompting. Prompting is one of those tricky things for teachers. We want to prompt to support students, but the amount of prompting that we do and the type of prompting that we do can either create some really independent strategic readers or create readers who are so dependent on us that they're constantly appealing to us and looking at us to see if they're doing it right or if they got it right. So you want to be careful not to take on all the responsibility with your prompts, and you want your prompts to be broad, not too specific, to let them really work through that word. So here's some great examples. The ones on the left are ones that I was taught, in school when I was taught, how to teach reading. But they really do narrow kids' thinking. And the worst part of these is that they create dependence on you. So teachers who have said, I don't know why the child is constantly looking at me to see, is that word right? When they've gotten it right, they've got it right. Why don't they just keep reading? Well, it's because we've created a monster, a dependent child because of our prompting. So sound it out. One of my least favorite prompts, but teachers have been taught to use it over the years. I would say the success rate of sound it out is less than 50%. It just doesn't happen. And it doesn't happen well because the English language sounded out just doesn't work. We have so many different sounds for, one spelling that we're really setting kids up for failure if our first prompt is sound that out. Instead, what do you know about this word? So you're still calling attention to the visual information, but you're not telling them to sound it out. So what do you know about this word? That general kind of prompt could be, well, I know this word starts with ST. Okay. Or I know this word ends like the word lunch, but it has a B at the beginning, so it could be bunch. You're still calling attention to print, but you're doing it in a very broad way. Get your mouth ready is another one of those prompts that I've heard a lot. And children don't understand what it means. What get your mouth ready is supposed to do is it's supposed to have the child, their mouth is supposed to form the first sound that they see. And for whatever reason, get your mouth ready just caught on in popularity, and poor kids all around have been like, I don't know what you mean by get your mouth ready. Instead, try something. Like, just give it a try. Try something. Does that make sense? Does that sound right? Does that look right? Now, I will still use one of these prompts every once in a while, but it will not be my only one that I use. I will try to use some more prompts that are broad. So if it's the first time or the first couple of times of me scaffolding the student to use meaning when they never do, or they never use story to help them problem solve, I would use, does that make sense? The first couple of times. Then once they start to use meaning and use what makes sense, then I'm going to move over to some broader prompts like, try that again, or read that sentence again. Find the tricky word. Again, putting that ownership on the child. And then look at the picture. Another prompt that really narrows kiddos' thinking. Instead, how can you check? Well, you could use the picture to check, or how do you know, or how else do you know? So again, not saying that the ones on the left are horrible. They're the ones that teachers have been taught for years and years and years. And every once in a while, maybe some of them might be helpful. But the ones on the right are broader and they really develop independence from you, which is what we want. Strategy 20 is to consider the efficacy of each student's self-correcting behaviors. I've told you, self-correcting is like my favorite thing. Because I don't view it as number one. Some people view when kids are self-correcting, a mistake is a bad thing, and all errors in reading are equal. I do not attend to that belief. I tend to believe number two, that self-correcting behaviors are this universally positive sign that you're integrating. Because if you read and you make a mistake, and then you go back and self-correct, and we're going to look at that an example of doing that in another video for this week. If you go back and self-correct, that means that your brain went, red flag, something didn't sound right, or something didn't look right, or something didn't make sense, and you're going back. I absolutely love self-correcting behaviors. So self-corrections, in my opinion, and in the opinions of Perkins and Croft, are better processing than uncorrected errors. But we'd rather them not make the error in the first place. But it's a process. Kids are going to eventually work through self-correcting to where they don't have to as much. But what you don't want, and I have some kids who will do this once I introduce self-correcting as a strategy, is they would like purposefully make a mistake and then go back and self-correct because self-correcting is good. And so I have to explain to them, be like, yes, self-correcting is good at a certain point in your reading process. But hey, now that you've got, all that integrated and your brain is firing on all cylinders and you've got print and you've got meaning and you've got structure, like you don't need to self-correct. You don't need to make a mistake just to self-correct. Like, make sure it's not too much of a And then strategy 21, help students break inefficient reading habits. So it depends on the habit. If they have an inefficient reading habit, like not attending to meaning, or repeating themselves a lot, or there's a whole list of things, you can draw their attention to it. Students recording themselves while reading is fabulous for the right kind of kid who doesn't mind listening to themselves read. I've had kids basically do their own running record on themselves. They read out loud, they record themselves, and then they go back and check themselves. Really interesting to see kiddos take ownership of that and go, oh, wow, yeah, I didn't pay attention to what it looked like there, or, oh, no, I didn't self-correct. You can also take the running record that you've created once your relationship is really strong with that kiddo and reread it to the kids while the students follow along in the print book and ask them what they noticed. So just trying to bring their attention to what they're doing. And then the last strategy from this wonderful book, provide massive practice. This is not the first time we have heard this. I've told my teachers, you want to mine your schedule for minutes. What opportunities are you missing where kiddos could be reading? Not doing something with reading and not doing a reading activity, but when are they reading? We want them to have texts that are appropriate for them in terms of level, where they are reading accurately, they're reading fluently, they're reading deeply for comprehension, and they're free from stress. So that is it for our notes from preventing misguided reading.